in matters of immigration, I think it would be more useful if Greece and Italy, who have actually been more affected, are actually the ones with a strong say on the issue.
For example, Germany says that we're closing our borders, leaving Italy and Greece to take the whole blow. I mean, that's not right. You shouldn't take these decisions.
There's a major distinction between refugees and illegal immigrants. We accepted refugees from Libya. In the past years, we've been accepting refugees from Syria. However, the main issue is that along with those refugees who have a genuine reason to be accepted into Greece, actually the majority are not even refugees, they're illegal immigrants.
Γεια σας, it's Keybros. Welcome back. Now let's begin part 2. But before we start, just let me remind you that we're now talking to 2 guests from Greece. They're Dimitris and Georgios. There is actually a part 1, so please do take a look. If you want to know more about how Greek people view the Hong Kong protests, the country's relationship with China, the Belt and Road Initiative, and the meaning of democracy, etc., etc. Please also remember to subscribe to the channel by pressing the red button below, like a video by giving a thumbs up, and also share the video with your friends. Right, without further ado, now we're going to move on to discuss some contemporary problems Greece is experiencing as a country in the 21st century. I'll hand it over to my fellow Keybro, who will be asking the first question.
So let's start talking about the European Union. There is a very clear divide between the North and the South in countries such as Germany and France and Italy and Greece. Do you think Northern European countries are too dominant in the EU?
I think this is an undeniable fact, as you said, that countries like Germany or France are more dominant and play a more significant role in the decision-making in the European Union than countries like Greece or Italy. And I think this is a fact because for us specifically, growing up in Greece, in the midst of the economic crisis, there were many negotiations with the European Union, and the constant thing that we always heard in the news is how the Germans are basically negotiating austerity measures for Greece and so on and so forth. So in a nutshell, I think that yes, could call it a North versus South divide. I'm going to be completely honest. Even though this divide has affected Greece negatively, I can actually see and I fully understand how this divide came to be because obviously Germany and France, for instance, are 2 countries with probably the largest population in Europe, have extensive power, and they are financially much stronger than the rest of the European countries, especially Germany. So I think that in the past decade, when the majority of EU decisions were centered around the economic crisis, investments, austerity measures, and loans, I think it's actually quite natural for the most powerful economies to have a more central role in the negotiations and in everything. Having said that, I think that there are a few things which could change because, okay, let's say that in economic issues, it's normal for Germany to take precedence, to have the main role in the European stage. But in matters of immigration, I think it would be more useful if Greece and Italy, who have actually been more affected, are actually the ones with a strong say on the issue. So I think the European Union has to be flexible. I mean, obviously, the most powerful countries should be the ones to set the stage. But I think that in some issues which affect the smaller countries more, I think it should be the smaller countries who should be given a more central role as well.
I totally agree with Dimitris. I don't have anything to add. I mean, he phrased that very well.
Sure. So with that being said, do you think the European Parliament, which technically has quite a lot of legislative power, but I think we all agree that in reality, the European Council and the Commission basically control what happens in the EU. Do you think there should be some sort of reform in order to give maybe less influential countries more of a say?
The fact is that when you're the person that's handing out money, which is basically what Germany was doing some time ago, you're the one to be taking the decisions. But sometimes it's like in the whole humanitarian and immigration crisis that's going on in Greece and Italy, for example. And yeah, I think that reforming these migrations committee would be a very nice thing to do, because Germany taking decisions about what's happening in Greece when they clearly don't have like a tenth of the problem we have here. Because what the Greek government has done, like not like a perfect job about it's done fine. I mean, before the coronavirus pandemic, they put immigrants in hotels and they tried to sort them out, give them passports, and not Greek passports, their passports. Anyway, stronger countries maybe should involve themselves a bit more. For example, Germany says that we're closing our borders, leaving Italy and Greece to take the whole blow. I mean, that's not right. You shouldn't take these decisions. But I can understand why Germany is doing it, because obviously it wouldn't want to have all these immigrants. If I were trying to get to Europe, I would go to Germany than the UK or France, not in Greece, which is having the economic crisis. Anyway, the reform, I think it would help Greece sort this problem out.
I would just like to add, the European Union should be reformed, not necessarily in terms of their legislative bodies. I think it would be quite difficult to reform the European Parliament. A lot of technicalities would need to be sorted out, which may be quite difficult at the moment, but rather in how these bodies take decisions, they should become more flexible and adjust to the ever-changing European landscape.
So there have been calls, because of the debt and economic crisis in Greece, that Greece should actually leave the Eurozone and turn back to the drachma. What are your views on this?
It's kind of a meme, between us and some friend of us. In my opinion, that's totally ridiculous. I mean, it's a lost situation for everyone, both for Greece, both for the EU. For Greece, clearly cripple the economy. Drachma would depreciate hugely and would basically be screwed. About the EU, just say that when you have a country that just says, I'm not going to pay my debts, go figure. It would create a huge problem, and I don't believe that neither Greece or the EU giants like Germany would want Greece to leave. Even when the referendum happened in 2015, which basically it was about that, the Greek people voted, let's say, to get out of the EU. The Greek government, which was making claims about if the people tell us to do so, we will do so, they didn't. They clearly didn't. It's a whole situation about drachma. And I think it's now been out of question for like 3 years, 4 years since the referendum, and figuring out our loans and how to pay them back.
As George put it, I think it should be out of the question because it is an absolutely ridiculous claim. Greece is unfortunately not at a point where we can actually sustain our own economy on a currency which will at the end of the day depreciate to a large extent. I think the only way in which Greece can actually recover from the major crisis that we suffered from in the past decade is if we stay in the Eurozone and we closely cooperate with other Eurozone and EU members. As George said, it would be quite a major loss, not just for us if we left the Euro, but it would also be a major loss for the Eurozone members. Because right now, obviously Greece has a specific amount of debt to other Eurozone countries, which would be made 10 or even 100 times more difficult to repay if we suddenly left the Eurozone. So neither us nor the Europeans want us to leave the Eurozone, I believe, and it won't happen.
To add to that, something very important. Right now, the things that's happening between Greece and Turkey and Germany, for example, taking a stance and saying, cut the crap, not playing here. I think because we have this debt in Germany, if there was a war to happen between Greece and Turkey, the one to lose most money would be Germany. We couldn't pay back our loans. This debt is like protecting us on one hand and crippling us on the other, but that's a totally different conversation.
Right, so obviously Greece is a member of NATO, and given the constant wars against countries in the Middle East, and also the fact that actually NATO bombed Yugoslavia or Serbia, which is Greece's ally back in 1999, do people in Greece, and also do you, support Greece remaining in NATO?
Don't know what other people think. But personally, I believe that being part of NATO is like a very important thing because let's face it, Greece is not very geographically speaking, its location between Europe and the Middle East and the whole situation with Turkey, and Turkey being in NATO, at least that has helped not having a war with Turkey, but would have been catastrophic anyway. Obviously, there are people that criticize things you said, like the bombing of Yugoslavia and Middle East countries and all that. But I think you can't really criticize them for that because I know this sounds harsh, but sometimes you have to do what you have to do. Let's say that if they didn't bomb Yugoslavia, maybe even today they would have civil war. My viewpoint, Greece being a member of NATO is totally a positive thing. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I quite agree with George. I fully support Greece's NATO membership. Now, as you've obviously said, there have been some controversial actions by NATO, the constant Middle Eastern campaigns that they conduct, the bombings of Yugoslavia are two great examples which have been mentioned by both of you. And I have to say that although the situation got quite harsh in these two specific examples, quite violent and quite sad, to be honest, despite all these facts, I think that this is not a justification which is strong enough for me or for any other Greek person to support Greece potentially leaving NATO. I think it's obviously a controversial spot. Some would even call it a dark spot in NATO's history. But I think the overall purpose of having an alliance is very, very important, especially for a country with a strategic location in the Mediterranean, as George very correctly said.
So do you think political correctness is a problem in Greece? Obviously, in countries such as the UK, to a very large extent, there are certain things that you cannot say. And there are also certain opinions which might be valid, but once you express those opinions, you will be condemned by large sections of society. So do you think political correctness is a problem?
In my opinion, political correctness is more like of a trend. It's what you're allowed to say that's fine by others. Some parts, I mean, it's okay. For example, not being political correct to say the N-word, which is an offensive term that was used by slave owners. I guess that's fine by me. I understand why black people don't want to be called the N-word, because it reminds them of the past, which not a very long but forgotten past, of like 50, 60 years ago. But in general, I think that political correctness, as of now, has gone a bit out of control. The thing is that the line between commenting and offending someone, it has totally gotten messed up. You can't comment on anything because everyone will be offended. Nothing. I mean, it's ridiculous. And privacy, you know, the right of freedom of speech. Because if I have an opinion, it's my opinion. It might not be right, but you need to respect that. Well, obviously, there are some sensitive topics that you don't respect. For example, yeah, if you're like a deep racist, that's out of question. But calling everything racist and not politically correct is ridiculous. I hope it stops.
Indeed, political correctness originally initiated as a norm which aimed at eliminating hate speech. Instances where people would offend other people based on their sexual preference or even their religion and country of origin. So I think that, as with many, many things in the 21st century, political correctness started out from a cause which is generally accepted by everyone. I mean, we can all agree here that racism is a terrible thing to do.
Exactly.
And I think that people who are genuinely racist should be punished and should not be accepted into society. However, I think that there's a major difference between establishing some boundaries and between what political correctness has actually turned out to be. Because nowadays, I mean, obviously, living in London as a law student, I have experienced political correctness both in Athens and in London. And I have to say that in London, with the UK being a more progressive and westernized society, political correctness is actually even worse than it is here in Greece. For instance, I clearly remember an incident where a person was giving out a speech about illegal immigration and how he was essentially saying that if a person enters the UK without all the appropriate documentation and legal justifications for entering the country in the first place, then he should simply be rejected and sent back to his country of origin. I was actually really saddened to see that this perfectly legitimate argument was viewed by many people as racist. So basically, even though political correctness started out as a useful tool which would protect minorities from being offended, it has actually ended up as a major restriction of freedom of speech. If I was to make a comparison, I would say that in Greece, it's not such a major issue as in the UK. Greek society is more conservative and still has not, let's say, evolved to the extent of the UK society. And thankfully, political correctness has not been that restrictive. But I would say that overall, as a concept, it is a classic case of a genuine cause which at some point went completely wrong.
It's used by anyone who doesn't like someone else's opinion. He says, well, you're racist. Why? Because you're not politically correct. And why you're not politically correct? Yeah, I don't know why, because other people say so.
Very true, because in Hong Kong, a lot of the protesters, they try to take the moral high ground. And whenever you disagree with them, they'll simply say that you don't have a conscience or that you're somehow a terrible person. And I think that actually negates any room for critical thinking. And it also stifles freedom of speech. I think the line has to be drawn where people are being offensive for no reason. They're not actually being constructive. That should not be accepted. But when people are offensive while they are providing some sort of valid criticism or valid opinion, I think that should totally be allowed. As Demetrius rightly said, in the UK and London, especially in university campuses, there are lots of things which might be valid, but you simply cannot say.
So as we all know, Greece has experienced a very serious refugee crisis in the past few years, especially with the Syrian civil war, with Turkey, etc. How is the situation now in Greece? Like, has the government taken any steps to stop the influx of refugees from the Middle East and sub-Saharan Africa?
I think the major issue with Greece is its close proximity to sub-Saharan Africa and the Middle East. As long as tension and war continues to persist in these areas, then undoubtedly it is only natural that there will be an incoming flow of immigrants and refugees who escape the living hell in which they lived in and try to find a better place. However, there's a major distinction between refugees and illegal immigrants. Greece has traditionally been accepting refugees. In 2011, we accepted refugees from Libya. In the past years, we've been accepting refugees from Syria. However, the main issue is that along with those refugees who have a genuine reason to be accepted into Greece, actually the majority are not even refugees, they're illegal immigrants who have decided to leave their countries for economic and social reasons, which is obviously understandable. But unlike refugees, it's not that they were living in a war zone. If you don't have the justification of living in a war zone, in order to enter a country, you need to have the appropriate legal documentation, and you actually have to offer the country something. Because there's a major issue in Greece right now. There's hundreds of thousands of illegal immigrants who are not registered in any official system, in any government record, and yet they are actually consuming Greek taxpayer money, and they are also living in suboptimal conditions. Thankfully, as the government changed in July 2019, the more conservative government that we elected have actually started sending people back to their countries of origin if they are not refugees or if they don't have the appropriate documentation. There's actually some very interesting figures which show that in the last 4 months, the 70% of illegal immigrants and refugees that entered the country were actually sent back to their country of origin because it was determined that they were not actually refugees, they were illegal immigrants without any form of justification or documentation.
Also, to add to that, refugees were used as a geopolitical tool by the Turkish government, by Erdogan. He was sending every single refugee that was coming from Syria. Syrians, yeah, I mean, clearly we should take them in, accept them, and send them maybe to other European countries, which that's the place they want to go, or keep them here, even give them citizenships. But the problem is that the people coming right now, most of them aren't Syrians. They are from Afghanistan, from Pakistan, from the Middle East. Might be like an active war zone, Taliban, for example, in their countries. But these war zones have been there for like, 30 years? They just remember that they have war zones so they could get into Europe. I think it's moved by the Turkish government just to try and sort of destroy Greece or make Greece look bad to people.
Thank you. One final question, an open-ended one. So given the increase of polarization in Greece you talked about with like anarchists and also emergence of right-wing parties such as like the Golden Dawn, how do you see Greece develop and progress as a nation for the next 5, 10 or even more years?
I think it's a very, very interesting question. Obviously, as you said, there has been an increasing polarization in the last couple of years in Greece, with both ends of the political spectrum essentially clashing. However, I'd like to mention that this phenomenon was more evident back when the economic crisis was even deeper. For instance, if I was to distinguish a specific time period during which this phenomenon was actually detrimental to Greece, I would say this would be from 2011 or 12 up until 2016 or 17. Because obviously the Greek people had been let down by the austerity measures, which had been brought by numerous governments and numerous political parties. So they were essentially resorting to the extremes. That's after all why the neo-Nazi party of Golden Dawn rose to prominence and at some point was the third most popular party in Greece. However, in the latest years, we've obviously done a great job, I believe, in keeping our debt sustainable and slowly but surely giving the turbulent period of the economic crisis. And I think that as Greek society has become more stable in economic terms, I think that in political terms, the spectrum has also ameliorated. Golden Dawn, in the latest elections in 2019, a year ago, they actually did not even make it to parliament, even though they were the third most popular party 5 years ago. And as a matter of fact, one of their key people, one very prominent and potentially future leader of Golden Dawn, has actually left the party. There was an internal division, and he has now founded a new neo-Nazi party. The pattern that we can actually see from the latest developments is that although polarization existed in Greece between, on the one side, the anarchists and on the other side, the neo-Nazis, those extreme organizations have had further divisions and polarizations of their own, which has weakened them considerably. Thankfully, the new government, which has been in power for a year, has been doing a great job in keeping the country steady, both socially and financially. So I think that this steadiness will continue existing in the Greek society. And I think one other factor which may reduce this polarization is the fact that this year we've obviously suffered from the coronavirus pandemic, and major disasters tend to get people of a country together as a nation. And also we've had some instances where tensions were really high between us and Turkey, which also, as a national emergency, makes people stick together and reduces polarization. Because at the end of the day, we are all Greeks, we all love this country, we all want to coexist with the rest of the countries around us, and hopefully we will work as one towards this goal.
Your question is very interesting, actually. As I was saying before, everyone has an opinion in Greece about everything. Good thing is that the far right and far left parties aren't really in the parliament anymore, with Golden Dawn being off the parliament. Also, they were declared, I think, domestic terrorists, weren't they? Yeah, they were leader, Nikos Michaloliakos. So he was arrested and imprisoned, I believe. But yeah, last government, the Syriza government, made more and more Greeks as time was passing to realize that these times are to be handled by serious people. And when you don't have serious people governing a country, you won't have good results. And it was pretty clear from 2015 till 2019. Alexis Tsipras is clearly not responsible enough to be leading a country. Some government members, I think it was the Minister of Internal Affairs, he was blackmailing an entrepreneur. I think that right now, especially last year in the elections where democracy got at 41%, which 41% in Greece for a political party is like a huge number. I mean, but for example, Syriza in 2015 got 23%, 25%, something like that. Getting such a high number and such a high approval rate for Kyriakos Mitsotakis, it was a very important thing. I believe that the whole situation with Turkey, with the coronavirus pandemic, Greek people more together. Greek people realize that this is our country, we all want the best for it, so let's keep it that way. I think if it wasn't for the pandemic, we would be in a very bright road, but just slowing us down. I think in like 5 years, if everything goes well with coronavirus and we have a vaccine in like, say, 3 or 4 months, I think we will start getting in very good shape as a country.
Two things which you guys have said can quite be applicable to Hong Kong. The first thing is harmony, because in Hong Kong, both sides of the political spectrum are trying to divide society into two camps. And we even have this something called 黃色經濟圈, which is basically the protesters, they would only eat at certain restaurants, they would only shop at certain shops. So I think that is actually very bad for society, because you want people to come together and come to a compromise, and you don't want them to divide themselves further. And also the point about good governance, I think although maybe the protesters have something legitimate to protest about, they never come up with solutions. And I think when you protest, when you complain about something, you have to provide a solution. Otherwise, you aren't actually contributing to solving the problem.
I also think we should come together as a society, not only in Hong Kong, but every country actually around the world can cooperate. Not only with like the coronavirus thing, but every other topic, global warming or whatever. So yeah, it's really a great pleasure having both of you on. Thank you very much again for coming on to our show.
Thank you for hosting us.
Thanks for hosting us, man.
All right, so Ευχαριστώ πολύ, and see you next time. Goodbye.